Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. What plant friends do, what plant friends do. My name is Darylyn. Pippa is hanging out with her dad, and this is plant friend down the street. Hey plant friends. So, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this. Maybe this is just something that I was confronted with a lot back when I used to work in marketing. But has anyone else noticed that search engines and being able to find anything that you want on the internet has gotten way more difficult in the past couple of years? Yeah, right? It has. So if you think back a few years, back to maybe the 2015 kind of era, back to the early 2010s, back to even when I was in like middle school or whatnot, whenever I would Google something, the first thing that would pop up would always be the Wikipedia page. And then after that, more additional legitimate sources. That's changed. And what's happened over the past couple of years is now, anytime you Google something, the first thing that comes up is always like half a page of ads, and then a whole bunch of items for sale, and then a whole bunch of blog entries and other items that have been optimized to pop up. And in order to actually find real information about anything these days, you really have to hunt for it. So the reason I bring this up, and the reason that it is especially of note to the plant community, is that the plant community is full of people who are constantly trying to learn new things. We're constantly trying to learn how to take care of new plants, learn how to use new systems for our plants, learn about reviews for products that we want to try. Constant learning, constant improvement. It's one of my favorite things about the plant community because I, in case you haven't noticed, am a huge nerd. So I love that about us. Rock on, nerds. However, this whole phenomenon of change in the internet, of how information is displayed and how easy it is to find information, really makes it difficult for those types that really love to do research, so that when we actually go ahead and try the new thing for our plants, nothing goes wrong. Well, this phenomena where the way that information is pushed up to the top of search engines on the internet is largely due to SEO, which is search engine optimization. This is something that really is the bane of my existence as a marketing professional. Like, I honestly can't tell you how much I disdain SEO. I really truly think that SEO has ruined the internet. And the whole myth going back to the late 90s and early 2000s when everyone was saying, oh, the internet's going to change everything. Everyone has all the knowledge in the world in their pocket now. Like, that's just completely not true, because the way the internet has been manipulated to make you think you found good information when you really haven't, there's just no way on the internet to know whether or not what you're looking at is true, verified, anything. There's just no way to know whether the person that is giving you this how-to on a soil mixture for a certain plant just got the plant yesterday because it's popular and they know that if they make a care video for it, it'll do really well, or it's a plant scientist, or it's someone that's owned a nursery for 30 years. Their experience and qualifications in dishing out this information is not taken into consideration by the algorithm. The algorithm will buoy things that are already doing well, and it will bury things that don't land with a splash. So this brings me to the topic for today's video, which is how to tell good plant care advice from bad plant care advice. Now, I am by no means an expert on any of the plants that I take care of. I've had a lot of success with certain types, and I can tell other people what I did that I think made the difference. But at the end of the day, I am not an expert, and I will never pretend to be such on this channel. I will always tell you with a disclaimer that this is just what I did, but I can't guarantee that this will work for you because I don't know that you'll be able to replicate my conditions exactly. However, one thing I would say I'm fairly good at is critical thinking. So I do think that my mission on this channel is to kind of put topics in front of other members of the plant community and encourage a dialogue, encourage a discourse, and kind of manage your expectations for how well a lot of this research that you're doing is actually going to set you up to succeed or fail. So the first thing that you want to take into consideration when you are thinking about following care advice or a tutorial or what have you that you found online, probably on YouTube, is, are you impressed by how this person's plants look? You would think that this would be an obvious one, but you would be surprised by the number of people that you see across the internet's land spouting care advice and giving how-tos on things that it doesn't really look like it's going so well for them. And honestly, it's not just plant people. Like, this is not like shading anyone or calling anyone in particular out, but you really can't ever consider taking someone's advice if the plant they have doesn't look good to you. So make sure you're thinking about that. If they're showing you the plant and it's got damage on it or it looks weird, and they're not pointing things out to you and explaining the origin of the imperfections or the origin of the damage, and if there's not a backstory and they're not explaining how they fixed the problem and pointing out that the new growth is now doing better, it may be that they're leaving some things out for whatever reason, and that reason may not be particularly malicious. Sometimes it's hard to always know every single thing that you need to say in order to make sure that some critical factor isn't missed. But yeah, if their plants look beat to hell, like, don't take their advice until they prove that they can actually take care of the plant. The second thing that you want to take into consideration is, how exacting and meticulous is this person being in explaining every single factor that could have affected their results? Here's an example. So I find a lot of times in the past when I've been burned by care advice on YouTube, I've gone back and rewatched the videos, and a lot of times the critical factor that's been left out of the equation is their humidity levels are not disclosed. Humidity is one of the biggest factors that you have to take into consideration when you're working with houseplants, especially tropical varieties like aroids, orchids, things like that. You have to take into consideration what your humidity is going to be. They could have their plant room jacked all the way up to 80%. They could be keeping the plant in a grow tent and not be disclosing that. They could just naturally be really lucky and have pretty high humidity in their house and not have ever realized that, and just think that these care tips are all going to make it work for your plant in low humidity and not be disclosing these things or explaining these things to you. And then your environment could turn out to be completely different, and then you end up getting burned by their lack of attention to detail and explaining all the different factors that you needed to take into consideration. So if it seems like they're leaving things out and they're not disclosing to you every single thing about where the plant is, how long it's been there, what kind of substrate it's in, what the humidity level is, what kind of lighting they're giving it, what kind of fertilizer they're giving it, is their water pH balanced or not. The list of factors that can determine whether you succeed or fail at something regarding your plants can literally go on forever. And so even if you really do a lot of research and you really take advice from someone you trust and you really think that what they're doing makes sense and it's going to work for you, you're still going to have an element of trial and error, an element of fucking around and finding out, because not every single factor is even something that a person is going to notice. They could be giving you care tips for an adult plant and you have a baby plant. Do not take care advice for a baby plant from a video where the person is featuring an adult plant. I will just tell you right here, right off the bat, that if you have a baby plant, you really can't go wrong with keeping it in sphagnum moss, bottom watering the sphagnum moss when the top of it comes dry, keeping it in nice bright light, direct or otherwise depending on the needs of the plant, in super high humidity with good airflow. You really can't go wrong there. There's, I'm sure, many exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, you can keep a plant in that setup indefinitely and it will not die, at least. Unless you get really unlucky with like an especially weak specimen, or any number of other things can go wrong. So I hesitate even like telling you that. But for the most part, if you are watching a tutorial and someone has an adult plant and they're giving you a soil mixture for it, don't put your baby plant in that. Like, it's probably not going to go well. You can always just keep it in moss until you feel comfortable that it's matured enough, or it starts busting out of the container you have it in and it's unavoidable, it has to be repotted. But these kinds of distinctions are the difference between success and failure with living things. So just make sure that you're paying attention. And if you're not 100% sure that you can replicate every single thing that person did exactly, don't expect the results that they got. Expect a good chance to get results similar to what they got. Maybe. And speaking of results, if someone is giving all kinds of care advice and giving tutorials and showing how to do things, but they're not holding themselves accountable to show results, that may be a red flag. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going wrong, but if you're not seeing what's happening with these plants that they've shown and given tutorials using, who knows what's going on with that plant? Who knows? You know, it may not have actually worked. I saw a number of import plant rehab acclimation tutorials where these plants were taken out of import boxes and they were just put straight into soil. And I can tell you right now, most of those plants are no longer with us, because back when I was new to the hobby and didn't really know what I was doing, I did that with a few plants and none of those plants made it. And some of these folks who put out those videos never did circle back to what happened to those plants, never did show growth updates. And I completely understand why they wouldn't want to. You know, it's embarrassing when you tell someone how to do something and you end up being wrong. Like, I hate being wrong. I hate being wrong. So I completely understand why they wouldn't want to do that, especially when there's probably like all sorts of other topics that they could cover that are more fun and get more views. And like, why do that to yourself? I get it, but I'm just telling you that if the person who's giving advice is not holding themselves accountable to show you results, take everything they say with a grain of salt. And if you're gonna go ahead and take their advice or follow their tutorial or whatnot, just be prepared that it is a wait and see. It's an experiment. It may not end up working out well for you. Another thing too is maybe do a little bit of research and dig a little bit into who this person is, why they're making plant content, how much experience they actually have, what kind of environment are they keeping their houseplants in. I've definitely been burned a few times taking care advice from professionals who run plant businesses and have huge greenhouses or huge warehouses. And obviously they know what they're doing in their environment because they're professionals. They earn their living off of keeping plants alive. But what I've noticed about the folks who are giving care advice who keep plants professionally is that oftentimes they're receiving the plants at a certain stage of maturity and then caring for it, acclimating it, rehabbing it, getting it to grow, getting it to look nice, and then they're sending it on its way. And they're only really seeing that plant for like a narrow window of time in its life cycle, and they're keeping the plants in these very specific conditions that are very conducive to encouraging the plant to grow really, really, really fast. So if you are getting a baby plant such as this, and you are looking for care advice, and you click on a care video from someone who's a professional who has a greenhouse and they sell plants to make a living, but every plant in that shot looks a lot more like that one, that could be maybe not the right advice. Because if they are getting the majority of their plants from imports, they're getting plants that look like this and keeping them in essentially a pristine environment and really encouraging them to grow. Whereas if you have a baby plant in your house and you are trying to raise it up to look like this or even bigger, it's it's just not going to work the same way. It's not going to function the same way as that environment. So just keep in mind that even if someone's a professional who's had a lot of success practically in real life growing and selling and shipping plants, their care advice might not work for you in your house. And that leads me to another point, is that where you live matters a lot. So I live in Southern California, in San Diego to be more specific, and we have some of the best weather in the world. And recently, it's also been quite a bit humid here. So pretty much year round, I have the ability to maintain temperatures in my house from 65 to 80 and humidity from 50 to 65 without really doing anything. I do not run a humidifier in my house. I used to, and then I found it didn't really make a difference for me because the way my house is set up and whatnot, and it just really wasn't worth it. So I actually stopped running a humidifier. I do not run a humidifier. But I am not gonna sit here and tell you that all of these plants behind me that do grow in open air in my house just fine do not need a humidifier. Because depending on where you live, your ambient humidity in your house may be 20%. The same thing can be said of how you're watering your plants, whether or not you should repot them in the winter time, whether or not you should fertilize them during the winter. All of that is going to tie in to where you specifically live. One thing that can be really helpful is that if you find a plant resource that is kind of specific to your zone or your local area, then that can be really helpful for you in that regard, because those people and those resources are already going to be taking those kinds of differences into account. You know, someone that's trying to keep these plants sat behind me in Wisconsin is going to have a much different approach to it than someone like me who's keeping them in Southern California. I have a good plant friend who lives in Alaska. And something that you have to remember about high latitude is not only is it cold, but half the year you have a ton of sunlight and half the year you have basically none. So she has to do things to keep her collection happy that are completely out of the question of me even having to think about, because we basically don't even have seasons in San Diego. These are all things to think about and consider. At the end of the day, this is not an exhaustive list, but the point is kind of to just get people thinking about, like, does this care tip make sense given what they've told me? Does it seem like they've maybe left something out here? Is there more to the story? Can I replicate what they're doing? It's all a journey. And I'm not saying that there's anybody out there that's deliberately giving bad advice on purpose. I do genuinely believe that most people who are out here trying to give care advice are genuinely trying to help out other people. But it's really, really hard to disclose every single factor, every single thing that could make or break whether or not something works. And so I just think it's really easy for a lot of those things that could be crucial pieces of information to get left out of a tutorial, because at the same time, if you go into every single teeny tiny thing that could go wrong, your video is going to be an hour long, which, you know, for some channels that seems to work fine. Some viewers love that, and other people are just like, I just need to know what I need to know, and I'm not going to sit here and listen to you ramble on about stuff that doesn't apply to my situation. So, and then I guess the last thing that's really important to think about too is, how old is this content? The plant community has evolved and changed very rapidly over the course of just the past couple of years. Technology has increased a lot. A couple of years ago, things like semi-hydro, ponds, self-watering, grow tents, terrariums, nutrients, fertilizers, all these things were a lot less dialed in and tried and tested than they are now. So if you are looking to follow a care advice video and you notice that it looks like it's kind of old, like more than a year or up to 2 years old, maybe go through their channel and just kind of check around and see if there's anything more recent that they've posted that kind of contradicts that video, or if they're even still using those methods. Or maybe just find a different one. Just find a different one, because people evolve in their plant care all the time. People are also human and don't want to continue to make the same content over and over again. Sometimes they may not think that it's really worth it. So make sure that whatever advice you're taking, it's relatively recent, up to date. The person is holding themselves accountable to show results. They're not leaving out important details like humidity levels or where they live geographically. And they have a similar plant to yours as far as maturity. You're not following adult plant care tips for a baby plant. And they have a similar environment to where you plan on keeping your plant. You know, all of those things taken into consideration will hopefully help you be a little bit more successful. But even so, there are all kinds of other things that could throw a wrench into your plans. So I think I'm going to leave it there, but I hope we can come away from this conversation with a little bit of heightened and perhaps renewed perspective on how to think critically about the information that we're consuming and the advice that we're being given. And with that in mind, thank you so much for chilling with me today. I hope you learned something, and if not, I at least hope you got to have a laugh. So I guess that's it, and I hope to see you back on this channel again real soon. Bye!